Everyone, welcome to today's webinar. I'm hopefully going to make it interesting and educational for you all. And, today we're really primarily focusing on people ops and HR and how to manage people at your companies with objectives, with goals. And objectives and goals I use very synonymously, but specifically agile goals. And we'll talk about why they're a little bit different than the old school kind of annual goals that are, set for the whole year and checked in on at the very end of the year for the once a year performance review or appraisal. These are very different types of goals. And when we talk about managing people and teams, we're going to emphasize our discussion on actual people managers. And I emphasize the word people because on one hand, managers does mean that these are folks who manage other folks. But at the end of the day, we want to discern that from project managers. And people managers have to do things a little bit differently. So let's quickly cover the broader agenda. So several things we'll talk about here. The top secrets and insights from Google and how Google itself uses agile goals to manage their people and teams. And when I say secrets, I may be slightly exaggerating because the true definition of secrets is something that nobody's supposed to know. So how in the world are you going to learn about secrets here? But the truth is that I've read a ton of insights from Google, from different books about Google's processes and their sort of recipes for success. And I'm going to dilute it all and boil it down to the key takeaways in this webinar. So unless you want to read maybe like 5 to 7 different books, you can just learn it here in this webinar. So in a way that is a bit of a secret. Why so many HR, and we will define why HR is people ops, and that has been actually rooted in Google also, but why so many HR people ops leaders are all implementing agile goals, also known as or referred to frequently as OKRs, objectives and key results, which are simply agile goals that Google has made famous. How strategic HR and people ops are the key partner of the CEO in connecting strategy to people's execution through managers at your company. And also about Google's approaches to OKR goal method, Google's approach and general best practices of improving employee experience by using agile goals. And you're probably wondering, how is that possible? We'll talk about that. We will talk about that. So let's get going with that and start initially with a introductory why HR is incredibly strategic, not just important, but incredibly strategic, to the CEO, to the company, to the board. It's common sense that the performance of your company, of any organization, profit, nonprofit, any company, any organization, is that performance is directly linked to the performance of the people, right? To nothing else, right? People are what makes a company, and it's their performance that is the performance of your entire organization, plain and simple, right? And guess which role at the company is the one that is responsible for getting the most value out of the people? It's HR, right? And there was this great article in Harvard Business Review a couple of years back about the modern new role of HR. And they talked about how CEOs know that they depend on their company's HR to achieve success because businesses don't create value in and of themselves. We just talked about it on the prior slide. People in those businesses do, right? If you have no people, there's nothing that's going to operate itself or manage itself or make things happen. It's actually living, breathing human beings, right? And HR is really the role at every company that is directly impactful and strategically driving that value out of people. This HBR article, Harvard Business Review article, also talked about elevating HR requires totally redefining the work content of the Chief Human Resource Officer, the VP of HR, the Director of HR, or really any anyone who is making a difference in HR. Businesses will benefit from better management of not just its financial resources, but also its human ones. Right? Again, it goes back to HR. And HR should recommend ways to use human capital to unlock or create value at the company. That is why HR is so strategic. Now, moving on to Google. And why Google? Because look, we can use other companies as examples. I just think that Google makes the best storyline, and the reason is that Google has several interesting factors there. It's a globally known brand. It's a very large multi-billion-dollar publicly traded company that's extremely successful. And Google is also very data-driven. So when they research information and do all kinds of studies at Google about HR and people management, there's a ton of brilliant mathematical data-driven analysis that happens in order to produce resulting information and advice and conclusions, right? It's not just hearsay, it's not just anecdotal, it's very real, and they also have a lot of data points, which makes all of their research and conclusions of their research statistically significant and very true and meaningful. So if some of you have read this book, Work Rules, it's a great book. I loved reading it. It was basically all the secrets of how Google HR works and how they manage people. So everything you ever wanted to know but were afraid to ask, it's right there in that book. And former senior vice president of people operations named Laszlo Bock wrote this book. And obviously Laszlo Bock is very well known in HR circles, but his title was People Operations. And I towards the end of the book, he had a whole section about why, when he was being recruited to Google, he was recommended to use the title of People Operations, not HR. And it was fascinating to read. So he talked about how at Google, conventional business language wasn't well regarded. They didn't like the word HR. And they felt that HR would sort of signify something that would be administrative and bureaucratic. By the way, by no means meant to be pejorative in the context of this webinar, just merely conveying a story read out of the book to give context, right? That's all I'm trying to do, because I have an incredible amount of respect and love for HR. I think it's a really strategic, critical function at every company, but at Google, they just named it a little bit different for a reason, and here's the context. So they thought HR would, at Google specifically, suggest administration and would be bureaucratic. In contrast, people operations was viewed as more like, it's a process of re-engineering HR, right? It was credible to Google engineers, and a lot of Google is engineering, connoting, actual ability to get, operational things and performance done. So they viewed HR as very traditional, compliance related, et cetera, while people ops was maximizing employee value, right? What we talked about on the prior slide from the Harvard research that was published in HBR magazine. And it was all about improving management and improving employee experience. So when we talk about HR and people ops, it's pretty interchangeable on this webinar, and that's the root of that title, which a lot of companies are actually embracing today, both in technology and outside of technology. So there are key challenges that CEOs and executives running a company have and need and can use HR's help. So number one is, majority of employees don't fully understand the company goals or what's expected of these very employees to connect to what the company considers important and to execute their own goals, because they don't even know what their goals are. It's a theme we're going to see recurring in the next 10, 15 minutes on this webinar. Another one was that 40% of global CEOs were surveyed, and they cite the failure to align as the single greatest challenge in executing their corporate strategy. Alignment, amongst the people at the company, and alignment through objectives and having that clarity of what's important, what to focus on. 84% of companies are not using their workforce to its full potential. That's PwC. And Corporate Executive Board, which was acquired by Gartner, 50% of average workforce time is wasted on non-productive work due to sort of lack of clarity of what's expected of people to focus on, right? So they're focused on things that are not really impactful and productive. Gallup said in their research a couple of years back, employees don't really know what's expected of them, which is significantly impacting, their progress and performance at work. And by the way, all of this costs you and every organization on average, according to Society for Human Resource Management, SHRM, a lot of you are members of SHRM, and the Brookings Institute, 70%. That's the cost of your workforce, 70%. So out of every, $10 or $100 million that you're spending every year at your company, 70 million of that 100 million, 70 million is the cost of your workforce. And that workforce, per the prior few slides, don't understand their objectives clearly. They don't understand what the company's objectives are. They don't understand what's expected of them according to Gallup. That's a real problem. So how do we ensure that the 70% that we spent is spent effectively, and that as HR or people ops, as Google has created this wonderful title that a lot of HR is using today, how do we operationally gain the most value out of our people, right? Per that Harvard Business Review article a couple of slides ago, that HR is strategically focusing on more and more as a function of modern HR. How do we get real value? Well, and that brings us to the next section about sort of the leverage every company has through its managers. Again, people managers, not project managers. And Google actually did this very interesting research, and we'll talk about that in a few slides. They called Project Oxygen. They did it about a decade ago or so, or more even. No, maybe about a decade ago. And then repeated last year and kind of enhanced the findings and added a couple more factors to it. But the big underlying question that it was all sort of starting, that Google started doing the research was, do managers matter? And I'll tell you more about it. But first, let's start with this research from Harvard again. And I'm a little biased. I went to Harvard Business School. So I just cite a lot of stuff from Harvard because I'm extremely familiar with it. But, to me, this research is incredibly eye-opening. It's just flagrant. It's like, how can this be? That employees complain about their managers, that, the employee's achievement is not being recognized. The second biggest complaint is that managers are not giving clear direction, in terms of setting clear objectives, connecting, clearly with the mission and strategy for the person, the team is. How can that be? Managers are paid a lot of money to do exactly this, to give clear direction, to set clear objectives, right? To recognize achievement. That's in every, fundamental basic management book. Every, most simplified books on management, like the 1 Minute Manager. They all talk about praise and recognition. How can that be? What about the one about not having time to meet with employees? Well, what do managers do if they're not meeting with employees? What can you possibly manage if you're not meeting with the people that you're, ostensibly there to manage? Refusing to talk to subordinates? Holy smokes! How is that even possible? So, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, real issues that don't make any sense. Like, how can that's what managers are supposed to do? And only 2 in 10 employees would strongly agree in a survey that their performance is managed effectively in a way that motivates them to do great work. That's incredible. 20%, 80% don't feel that way. What are managers doing? Which is exactly why Google started doing that analysis, very data-driven analysis that was in 2002. So they went out and ran an uncontrolled experiment by simply getting rid of all managers, right? Very interesting, right? So a team of researchers set out to prove that some at Google suspected that managers don't matter. People suspected managers don't really matter. And, that guiding question here, you can see in the second paragraph, the guided question shifted from, do managers matter, to ultimately, what if every Google had an awesome manager? Because the finding was indeed that managers do matter a lot. In fact, this was such an interesting research that Google took on, and it was very real and substantive that there's a lot of press about it. Inc. Wrote about how lessons from Google's failed quest to run a business without managers. That's incredible, right? They were asking, do managers matter? Are managers necessary? And it was very real. I mean, there was, like I said earlier, a real belief that managers actually really don't matter. People can manage themselves. And then, New York Times wrote about it. Google's quest to build a better boss started from this Project Oxygen, where they wanted to get rid of managers altogether. Harvard, again, coming back to Harvard, and I'm slightly apologetic for not using other sources, maybe Columbia, Stanford, Wharton, et cetera. It's just like I know where to find all this information, but it's good research and it's good case studies, right? So, Harvard had a case study based on Google's research. It was that incredibly impactful and well analyzed. Google's Project Oxygen. Do managers matter? And yeah, I mean, turns out they really truly do. So Google's conclusion was research shows that managers do matter, and they matter quite a lot. They can have a significant impact on business outcomes and employee engagement. That's a big deal, right? And like, of course, a lot of you maybe like rolling their eyes and like, of course managers matter. Like, why would Google even like question that? That doesn't make any sense. But actually, if you look back at the initial issues that Google was looking into, there was a real impetus, a catalyst, or a set of factors that were catalysts for why they decided to analyze this. There was a ton of maybe not evidence, but certainly beliefs, and I think a lot of companies may still have them, that maybe managers actually don't add value. But the reason for that was actually like a false negative, was that many managers are just not very effective. They don't have the core factors or principles for making them effective, which is why it was necessitating asking the question, are they necessary? Because it's almost, in like 80% of the cases, there's a ton of research that most managers are not ready to manage effectively, right? So that's what necessitated asking this question. And Google's people operations, HR, they were right in spearheading this research with Google's data. So what were the key takeaways from Project Oxygen and Google's best managers? Well, clear vision and strategy for the team. By the way, strategy converts into team's execution through objectives, through goals, right? They're also a good communicator, right? Communicating effectively what's required of the people, what their clear objectives are, communicating recognition, praise, right? Performance issues that need to be coached on. This person does not micromanage. By the way, micromanagement is the opposite of setting objectives, because objectives are not like micromanaging the person's work every day. It's setting clear quarterly objectives and helping coach people and help people get unstuck, right? Once you have objectives, it significantly like reduces micromanagement by like 80%, because you no longer need to stand over people and look over their shoulder. Good managers discuss performance. And some of you may ask, like, well, of course, that's common sense. Of course, you're going to discuss performance. But remember, a couple of slides ago, one of the research findings from Harvard Business Review's study was that managers avoid talking to their subordinates and discussing and coaching them on performance issues. So Google found that good managers actually do, in fact, do that, right? Counterintuitive to think that people wouldn't, but the findings show that a lot of managers actually do not do this. Incredible. Absolutely incredible. That's their job. They don't do their job. They're also results-oriented, right? They're not focused on micro tasks. They're focused on results, and results are their objectives, their goals. This webinar is about how to use goals to improve your company, right? How the HR team can help educate and guide managers of the company towards using objectives, right? And results are, when you set objectives, you're seeking a specific result. You're not telling people how to do something, right? You're telling them what to do, what to achieve, what outcome you want. That's results, that's goals, right? They're also good coaches. They provide feedback and coaching. There's another research, just not to overly focus on Google, from Gallup. They had a book that they wrote that, sort of was rooted in this research, The 12 Elements of Great Managing. And the couple of key takeaways that are relevant to this conversation are, the manager connects the job to the organization's mission, right? By the way, that's about setting objectives, right? Here's what your objective of your job is, and here's how it connects directly to the company's top objectives or goals. I use objectives and goals and OKRs, about which we'll talk a little bit more, very synonymously. It's just goals, right? Set clear direction of what's expected. Again, that's all about objectives, right? Discuss progress again, right? And progress discussed objectively is very different than just speaking in vacuum, right? When people don't set objectives, when managers do not set objectives, how can you be effective at discussing progress? What kind of progress are you discussing in the first place if you didn't have an objective, right? Like, is it just simply throwing all kind of micro tasks at people and standing over their shoulder and discussing progress? That's micromanagement. Recognition and praise, right? And lastly, enabling learning and growth, and that's coaching people, right? Another one is McKinsey and Company research, decoding leadership and what really matters. And some of the key takeaways there were clarify objectives, develop others. That's the coaching part, the feedback, right? Give praise, positive praise, very important. There's actually research I should have thrown in here that shows that focusing on the positive is like 5 times more impactful on people actually performing well than focusing on the negative. I mean, that's common sense psychology, but it's particularly relevant and germane to this topic and helps drive people's performance at work. And again, strong results orientation. And that's not micromanaging with tasks and killing people with a million cuts and talking about micro tasks and standing over people's shoulder and just, telling people how to do their job, but instead really focusing on objectives that are, focused on results, the outcomes. And so what are the consistent repeating principles here? What are we hearing again and again in the past, couple of slides from Google, Gallup, McKinsey? It's about setting clear objectives. It's about developing and coaching. It's feedback on the progress. It's recognition and praise and strong results orientation, and not micromanaging, but concluding with, here are the results we achieved, here's how we can do better, and here's what we did really well, here's what we should continue doing again and again really well. Things like that. In fact, I would refer to it as the life cycle of effective management. There are, simple 5 steps that everybody can do, and you can create as a process at your organization. Set objectives, agile goals, and we'll talk about what agile really means in a few slides. Check-ins, that's where you check in on the progress. Remember, we talked about, progress and focusing on the progress, right? Discussing progress. How HBR, Harvard Business Review published that research about how a lot of managers actually do not talk about progress. Well, you do these check-ins, means your employees check in with you briefly every week for like a couple of minutes on their progress towards their key objectives, and you're discussing progress. Feedback on the progress. Effective feedback means that it's objective, not subjective, not arbitrary. It's based on actual goals, objectives that you put in place, right? And obviously recognition. And finally, review snapshots. Not once a year annual performance review that's based on just nothing that happened over the past 12 months, but snapshots that happen, twice a year, every 6 months, like every half a year, or 4 times every quarter, depends on your company's pace and preferences, right? But these are based on these regular progress check-ins and based on actual data collected through achievement towards objectives. So you see, everything is very interconnected. That is effective management. Jack Welch at GE said, before you are a manager or a leader, success was all about growing yourself. You were a direct contributor. But when you become a leader, success is about growing others, right? And growing others through an effective life cycle or system is the right way to do it, right? In fact, I'll wrap up this section that Deloitte just this year, literally like maybe 6 weeks ago, released this research called Global Human Capital Trends. What all the best HR slash people ops operations executives, managers are focused on is this trend of implementing this process, the system that their managers are guided to use agile goal setting like OKRs, right? Doing these like one-on-one meetings and check-ins on the objectives, so keeping things objective, not subjective, providing feedback and coaching and development, and then doing performance snapshots like I talked about in the few slides ago. Very important stuff, right? And this is based on research at Deloitte. So everybody's truly on the same page. Deloitte, Google, Gallup, McKinsey, the life cycle of effective management. It's a consistent theme. So about HR and people ops helping your managers at your company, we just learned from Google that managers do matter, right? We questioned whether they really do, and it ultimately turns out through a ton of research that, oh, yes, they do, very much so. So how do we take these levers? These are true levers at your organization, and make them manage their people effectively, objectively, not subjectively. Well, Google has this website, which is part of Google. It's called Rework. They talk about how they manage their people and how they set goals at Google. They say research shows that performance is higher when people are committed to their goals. It's anecdotal prior to this research, but now that Google has put data into motion and researched it effectively and realized that there's a tremendous amount of data-driven conclusion in supporting that people actually do perform very well when they're committed to goals, right? It's not just an anecdotal thing. It's not just some kind of vacuous, fluffy idea. It's a real thing. It's a best practice, and it's supported by data. So goal setting is critical. But Google uses the system called objectives and key results. What in the world are these OKRs? Some of you already know them really well because I think the whole world is moving towards them. Thank you, Google, for making them popular. But there's this great book called Objectives and Key Results. Paul Niven and Ben Lamort are friends of ours. In fact, Ben Lamort is an advisor to our company. And they wrote this, what I would think is a Bible of OKRs. But OKRs are a critical thinking framework and discipline, ongoing discipline, that seeks to ensure employees work together, focusing their efforts to make measurable contributions that drive the company forward. But I will boil all of this down to just say OKRs are simply goals. It's just goal-setting process that's clear and simple. Going back to Laszlo Bock that we talked about earlier, this book is amazing. Again, I highly recommend you pick it up. And you basically learn from this book about OKRs. Also, just a couple of weeks ago, another book came out by John Doerr, who was an initial investor in Google and introduced Google to OKRs because John Doerr worked at Intel, and we'll talk about the history of OKRs. That's where OKRs were made popular by Andy Grove. And it's funny, Larry Page, the co-founder of Google, actually gave his own endorsement and said, I wish I had this book 19 years ago when we founded Google. It's funny because he actually knew quite a lot about OKRs, but the book creates more clarity today for using OKRs. Also a great book, really popular. Bill Gates did a review of this book just like 2 weeks ago. So highly recommended. And the subtitle is How Google Bono of U2 and the Gates Foundation rocked the world with OKRs. But again, OKRs are just goals. Let's not complicate things. There's a video that over 500,000 managers, executive managers like C-level managers, C-level executives, general managers, middle managers, frontline managers, and some even aspiring managers, 500,000 plus of them have watched this video just in the past few years, which is incredible because this video is about an hour and a half long. By the way, if you don't want to watch the whole thing for an hour and a half, you can go to our website, atiim.com, A-T-I-I-M.com. In the footnote, you'll see Google OKR video transcribed. You can read it, and it'll be faster. But you'll learn a lot here about OKRs too. So you may not even have to watch this video or read the transcription, but Google made it really popular a couple of years ago, and that many people all over the world at global organizations have been watching this video to learn how to implement OKRs at their company. It's not that difficult, but the history of OKRs actually you've heard of MBOs, Management by Objectives. That was coined by Peter Drucker, who's the Dean of Modern Management. He wrote it in The Practice of Management, great classic book on management. Andy Grove talked about Intel MBOs in his another fantastic book called High Output Management. I think every CEO I know has read this book, or both of them actually. And Google, actually, Intel did not refer to them as OKRs. It was Intel MBOs. It was Google that started referring to them as objectives and key results. But they're very much, as you can see, the theme here is they're just objectives, goals, objectives, right? OKRs are they're a modern acronym, but they're not really anything more than just a clear process of setting objectives and ensuring that people use them. And that's sort of like the history, the MBOs in the 60s. Intel, was using them, in the 70s and 80s, and then Intel's Andy Grove wrote about them in 1983. Google started using them in 1999. Our company invented the software. It was one of the first software companies that allowed companies to manage goals and rooted in the objectives and key results methodology that Google uses, just making it simpler to do agile goals at scale. And by the way, if you want to learn even more about OKRs, you can, again, go to our website. It's just free content. At the top, you go to OKR goals over here in the menu and click on OKRs 101 and just read all this stuff, right? All the information is there, public. So here's the thing. I see thousands and thousands of companies every month. Like we're seeing, companies that download our books on our website about OKRs. They come to our website, and so many companies are today guiding their teams and transitioning to a concept of managing everyone with objectives and using the OKR system that's been made really popular by Google. And OKRs are just simply agile goals. And I keep talking about agile. Let me reinforce what I mean by that. Agile means they're set quarterly, not like once a year annually. You don't really set objectives every week or every month, because then it's not really objectives. That's probably more like initiatives, right? And I will define for you later why goals are not tasks. They're very different, right? The way you structure and framework them. But they're set quarterly, not annually, and they're not static, right? Because they're quarterly. They're faster cadence, and then they are checked in weekly for just like 5 to 10 minutes, lightweight check-in for an employee to their manager, from their manager to a higher up manager to an executive, and they provide clarity, alignment, and effective feedback on real-time progress. That's why they're agile. The progress is in real time. You don't wait for a whole year to find out if the goal has been accomplished or not. That's all OKRs are. Very simple. These are some of the very many companies globally. These are the well-known brands that use OKRs, either across the entire company or many of the departments and business units and teams. But they have a lot of executives, middle managers, general managers, frontline managers embracing OKRs and managing people with objectives and key results. Here's another set of companies. There's a lot more today than there were yesterday, and yesterday a lot more than there were the day before yesterday. It's a really popular management philosophy that's taking over the world, right? And HR and people ops are at the tip of the spear, embracing and helping people learn, and CEOs implement it internally. It's a big deal. And OKRs are just better than generic goals. They're simple, transparent. They're all about regular check-ins, not a once-a-year thing. There's full alignment across the company that you can create through OKRs. And why do CEOs and people ops implement OKRs? They do it as part of performance management. Performance management is a very powerful concept. A lot of companies are modernizing their performance management practices, starting at the HR team. And clear communication of top organizational strategic goals. They help connect all the employees to what matters to the company, to the top. They improve the focus on what matters. It's better agility due to more frequent cycles, not once a year. They drive alignment, they increase transparency, and improve engagement and experience of employees. Now let's talk about HR and people ops helping CEOs connect everyone to the company mission. So here's a story you probably read before that, and it was written about in the Practice of Modern Management. It's called the Three Stonecutters. This traveler is passing through town, and he sees three stonecutters in the town square. They're cutting stone, and he comes up to the first one and says, "Hey, what are you doing over there?" And the first stonecutter looks up at him and says, "Well, can't you see what I'm doing? I'm just doing my job, making a living, making $1." And he came up to the next stonecutter and says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And the second stonecutter said, "Can't you see what I'm doing? It's obvious. I'm just cutting stone." And then he comes up to the third stonecutter and goes, "Hey, and what are you doing?" And the third stonecutter says, "Well, hey, can't you see what I'm doing? I'm building a beautiful cathedral." So the perspective and how each one of those stonecutters was connecting their effort to what truly matters was extremely different. The first two didn't have any connection. What mattered as a result, the ending final outcome, the ending result of their effort. They weren't connecting that at all. There clearly was not a people operations department or HR helping the CEO over there, the builder of the beautiful cathedral, to show people how what they work on, what their objectives are, and how those objectives connect to the final objective of building a beautiful cathedral in this town. And HR can easily do that by implementing goal-setting process, by guiding the CEO and the managers, on the best practices of objectives and key results, from the books that I mentioned, whether it's Work Rules by Laszlo Bock, or the Objectives and Key Results book by Paul Niven and Ben Lamort, or the new book from John Doerr, Measure What Matters, that just came out, and it's on Amazon, that Bill Gates reviewed. But any of those insights are extremely valuable. Remember, we said earlier, the role of modern HR is figuring out how to, get the best value out of the people, out of the human resources of the company, right? And that's what HR does. One of the things that HR does, and it's very popular today, is things like implementing the process of objectives, goal setting at the company, like OKRs, or technologies. For example, our company is the technology that allows to set objectives and key results and implement it at scale very easily in the company. We have a way to enable people to provide feedback to other employees based on their progress, or provide them with feedback and when they exemplify core values of the company, what truly matters to the company, right? So it's things like that. Now, how does HR help the CEO enable alignment? Alignment is hard to do if you're not using software, right? Constantly sending emails and PowerPoints that nobody ever looks at again are harder, but you can do it through software as well. But the key concept, overarchingly, putting technology aside, is about understanding how to align from the top corporate goals to departmental, to the team, to the individual, helping managers learn that process, allowing people to, at the very least, visualize what are the top company goals, right? The CEO has those. The executive team knows those, right? What are my team's goals? Making sure that every manager think about making their goals visible and clear. What are my own goals? Making sure that the manager has these conversations with their subordinates and direct reports about setting those objectives for the quarter and checking in on them. In our own software, we actually have something called Goal Alignment Chart. It's a visualizations of goals and how they align. This is not an org chart. It's not about people. It's actually about goals, believe it or not. It's a really tremendous, impactful visualization of how everyone's objectives align to what matters to the company. And it's very powerful and engaging, creating a unique experience for employees to know how they connect to what matters and not be one of those 95% statistic we showed earlier from Harvard about those 95% of average company's employees not knowing what the company goals are or what their own goals are. Now, to make a goal-setting process successful and to enable the managers at your company to get the most value out of employees, you have to localize this process to the managers. It shouldn't be a process where HR says, hey, here's what everyone's goals are. HR and people operations, the key role is to help guide people in the right direction, to learn about it, to embrace this internally, to work with the CEO to implement the process effectively, bring in the best practices or even technology to enable that internally to be easy, right? To simplify it for everyone so that people don't have to use Excel or emails to communicate objectives and progresses, which creates more hassle and waste of time and creates inefficiency, right? So it must be localized. So helping CEOs with implementing goal setting process. Well, remember, from HR or people ops perspective, it's all about performance management. What is performance management? First of all, it's establishing measurable goals and objectives for employees. So goals are a critical tip of the spear of performance management. And most importantly, performance management is management. So HR enabling performance management means enabling managers who, as we saw Google confirmed for us, managers do matter a lot and make a tremendous impact in the organization, but enabling them to do better and more effective performance management internally, starting with setting objectives, right? And the three keys to success at a high level is discretion. Like you don't have to make things perfect, right? Use discretion, use common sense, and walk before you run, right? There are companies that consult on setting OKRs, or there are companies like us who serve you with best practices through technology that helps you very easily create objectives. They have like goal wizards in there, help you set it up and onboard you, and make it super simple yet powerful inside your organization to use goals, right? And communicate effectively, create feedback on the progress on goals, etc. Andy Grove also said, as part of implementing, try not to do too many things. Don't focus on everything, or you're going to focus on nothing, right? Just have a couple of key goals for the corporation at the top corporate level, for each business unit, for each team, for each individual. Don't have, 10, 20, 30, 3 to 5 objectives for the quarter. Now, under each objective, you can have many projects or initiatives, but the objectives are just the results you're seeking. You can only focus on so many things. Another key implementation, tactic or tip is directly from Steve Jobs, that there's a concept of directly responsible individual, DRI. Steve Jobs used this at Apple. And each objective is owned, quote unquote, by a directly responsible individual. Objectives cannot be, in vacuum floating in the air by themselves. There has to be a specific person directly responsible for checking in on the progress of this objective with the team. Typically, it's the team's manager. Why? Because without responsibility, there's no accountability. Somebody needs to be directly responsible for each objective. It's a very simple concept. Regular check-ins, we mentioned this term before here. And, Andy Grove, who wrote the book High Output Management and introduced Intel MBOs to us, which is what Google refers to as OKRs, he said that the key, right, for agile goal setting, the key to high performance of the organization, the key to getting the best value out of your human capital is to set and check in on these goals frequently, right? If you don't check in on them frequently, it's just another annual goal that nobody ever looks at again or remembers. A lot of you here are HR executives. You've heard of Donna Morris. She's a rock star in the world of HR or people operations. Actually, her title was, I think, the Senior Vice President of People, right? And, Adobe also said, we're not going to call it HR. We're going to call it people because we're going to make it clear that this is about getting the best out of our people. And she talked about how they switched over to regular check-ins, and that made a huge difference because they're very lightweight. They're light. They take a few minutes. You check in. You get feedback, some coaching, done. There's no heavy, super time-consuming, wasted sort of efficiency on annual performance reviews that take, hundreds of hours, like for managers to do. GE is this very large global organization with hundreds of thousands of employees. They moved away from, these old school processes of annual reviews and annual goals to continuous check-ins. In fact, Gallup did analysis and research and said when you combine these agile goals with regular feedback, and not just set a goal and have this kind of set and forget situation, set and forget doesn't work. You set goals and you combine them with the process of providing feedback on them. Remember, we learned from Google, McKinsey, and Gallup earlier today that having these conversations about progress, providing coaching and development is critical in what makes someone an effective manager. You got to combine them and do it regularly. If HR or people ops don't work with the CEO to guide their managers to do this effectively, right? We are not getting the real value out of our people, right? And that's what that Harvard Business Review article talked about. The modern role of HR is about getting the value out of their people. This is a core tip, right? Remember, we talked about the secrets. These are some of the secrets of what modern HR, modern people operations is all about. That significant impact on value and return on investment in the organization, on your people, right, is bringing these guiding principles to your team and making your company better through people, right? Deloitte did this analysis and said these more frequent check-ins, right, another tip, right, another data-driven tip, makes your company 3.5 times more likely to be in the top quartile of your business performance in your industry when checking in on objectives is frequent and not, very rare. 94% of employees in this other research that was recently published want their managers to do these regular lightweight check-ins to get the updates on progress regularly. But remember, it's common sense. That Harvard research talked about how employees were complaining that managers are not sitting down with them enough. They're not meeting with them enough. They're not speaking to them enough. They're not giving feedback enough. And that's why all this data makes sense, right? That's what employees really want. They don't want to be in the dark. They want to know where they stand. They want these check-ins so that they're more aligned with their manager. How do these check-ins work? They happen every week. We have some customers, very large organizations that do it once every 4 weeks, but majority of our customers are, very, fast-paced organizations, anywhere between a couple of hundred to 1,000 employees that want to move fast, be more agile as a company, address issues head-on in real time, and not wait until the month is over or, find out a quarter too late or a year too late that something was, there was an issue. So these check-ins should happen regularly throughout the quarter. Every 1 week for 5 to 10 minutes is super easy to do. And that's what your manager should be doing. You're hiring and paying these managers to manage people. And that's the requirement of that job is to meet with those people, right? To meet with them regularly and checking in with them, right? So that's a key insight. There's a ton of benefits. You know what? I don't want to read them all to you. You'll be bored. But you can get a copy of this presentation either from HCI or we can send them to you. I'll tell you how to get a PDF copy of this presentation and a bunch of other things as free gifts at the end of this webinar in a couple of minutes. But another few tips I wanted to tell you from an HR perspective is give guidance to your managers that goals are not tasks. Lou Gerstner and John Wooden, actually, UCLA coach, one of the most successful sports coaches of all time, they had the same type of quote that, don't mistake activity with results. Don't be a busy bee. Everybody can be busy, but are you actually achieving intended results? And goals are what the intended results are. See the difference? The intended result is what you want to see as the outcome at the end of the quarter. It's not about, what activity or tasks you should be doing. A task is something you do. A project is an initiative, right? You can complete a project and do a lot of different projects that will fall under achieving a result in the end of the quarter. That's what your goal is. To-do lists are not goals. They're just to-dos. They're activities. Putting things in your calendar, that's not a goal. Using, technology like Trello or Jira or Asana or Microsoft Project, for God's sake. These are maybe task tracking tools or tracking your average activity or your more sort of glamorous to-do lists, but they're not goal-setting applications. Goals are different. It's a whole different thing. These are measurable. These are objectives. You check in on them. Completely different process. Entirely different. So I hope I gave you a lot of tips and insights and educational um, information about the importance of setting objectives, the importance of ensuring that your managers are well guided by HR to know how to learn about setting objectives, especially agile objectives like Google's OKRs. I hope I told you where to find information about OKRs, either of those books on Amazon or free content from us. That I gave you a link to our website, atiim.com. Um, you can also email us and email in the subject line and say hi. That's it. We'll email you back anything you want. We'll follow up and ask, what would you like? Would you like a free live demo or free consultation on setting objectives and how OKRs work, or free copy of this presentation or others, or ebooks or guides for setting OKRs? We can send you any information. And I hope you learn the importance of people operations / HR to unlocking value of your employees, and not just thinking of HR as as a matter of how Google didn't want to think of HR, right? HR truly is extremely strategic, very important. It's truly people operations, whether the title says that or not. At Google it did, but it's truly about using operational best practices to get a great outcome from all of your employees. And you do it through leverage, because your managers are levers, right? You pull down that lever. Remember, was it Archimedes or who said that? Give me a lever long enough and I can move the world or planet Earth. Your managers are your levers. If they're not doing this effectively, if they're not doing performance management correctly, which starts with setting clear objectives, and if they're not using agile objectives, for example, like OKRs, if they're not doing it at scale in a way that creates efficiency, rather than sucking up a lot of time inefficiently, if they're not doing that, that hurts all of your people at your company. That's that 70% that we talked about earlier. The cost of that workforce is 70%, right? And you basically spend that 70% ineffectively because your levers that magnify all the bad things or magnify all the good things, they would be ineffectively managing all of your human capital, people, employees at your organization. So hopefully those tips were helpful, relevant. I hope you learned some of the key insights from Google and other best practices from other organizations. And I think with no further need to spend time today, I'll give you a couple of minutes back to your day. Or if you have any questions, Holly, does anyone have questions? We can answer them.
Hey there, Zorian. Yeah, let's go ahead and grab one or two, depending on how much time we have left. We've only got a couple minutes left, so we'll just do what we can with that time. And I'll go ahead and leave this slide up so that you guys can copy down the address to get in touch with Zorian if you have any follow-up questions after this. And of course, if you did ask questions today, we'll make sure that Zorian gets those very soon. So let's go ahead and take Kathleen's question. She asks, how can we get the team as a team and on the same page, or even get the thinking to go in the positive and right direction?
Yeah, so getting the team on the same page in general, it's not a simple matter of like one meeting, right? However, if you give the guidance to your CEO, to your managers, as an effective HR manager, leader, or practitioner, you should be able to have a conversation with a CEO and talk about goal setting, learning on this webinar, presenting them with resources like the books that I talked about, and then discussing how to implement a process. And again, technology, I'm not trying to sell you our product by any means, but I definitely do want to promote it in a benevolent way, meaning that technology like our product, Atiim, actually does enable setting goal and creating alignment through objectives at scale, very easy and simple, right? Instead of using PowerPoints and email. So technology is there to make it super simple and effective for you, right? Make your organization successful. But at the very least, a meeting with a CEO, talking about this book that you read and some of the best practices you've learned, that's real value add. That's what I expect from our HR leader. That's what every successful CEO and organization and other executives expect from their HR leaders. That's what HR is there for, to create value and get best value and best experience out of the employees. It's a great question.
All right, thanks so much, Zorian. And since we started just a minute or two late, let's go ahead and get to one final question for the afternoon. This question comes from Stan, and I think I already know the answer to this one, but we'll definitely elaborate on what might come. So, Zorian, can goal setting be owned and driven by the employees themselves? For instance, managers could still have oversight and approval.
Absolutely. But this is a heated topic, because I think some people, they always say, like, goals should not be top down because that's authoritarian. Well, of course, it shouldn't be just top down, but goals, bottom up goals, which is what a lot of people refer to as, OKRs being. It doesn't also mean that employees just simply come up with goals by themselves without any discussion or coaching from their manager. It's always a bi-directional process, which is exactly reflective of how and mirroring the way that actual management works, where the manager, an effective manager, works and converses directly with their subordinates about what objectives should be. Then a good manager will tap into the collective wisdom of the team of what their objectives should be, right? And they discuss it, they triangulate on it, right? And come up with the best outcome. It's a bi-directional process. That's how managers typically work with employees. Employees present their viewpoints, which is exactly what a manager should definitely listen to and take into account. Otherwise, why are you hiring people, right? You should be hiring smart people who know what they're doing, or you're coaching them. They grow very effectively, but you should listen to their input. But the manager always has a right to provide feedback on it and maybe, slightly adjust the goals, etc. So bi-directional process, and exactly employees should have part in it 100%, and the manager should feedback on it, and it should be a partnership. That's how you set goals in a modern way. Great question. All right, Holly, I think that's it, right?
Yeah, let's go ahead and wrap it up. And so we'll just remind everyone that today's webcast has been approved for HR, CI, and SHRM credit. Just a little bit of a different way that you'll find your information for those credits if you go to your My HCI profile. That drop-down menu will take you to My Learning Journey, and that's where they'll be. One more big thank you to Zorian and Atiim for today's webcast, and for all of us here at HCI, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.